All right, we're live. We're live. Welcome everybody. Happy Monday. I'll give it a few minutes here to let everybody come on in. Got a leaner crew than normal. Phyllis had something she had to travel for, but gonna put something in chat here and just get this out. Welcome everyone. Hey, Michael, can you guys hear us okay? So we're going to start off today. I was talking to Brian over the weekend and noticed this article here on, the UK cracking down. Hey there. The UK, Brian, cracking down on LinkedIn. So I thought about that and thought about, the kind of where you're headed, Brian, in that, you're seeing, privacy, in this next venture, right? You've done MSPs, and I'll let you introduce yourself for those that may not know you shortly, but, you've done MSPs, you've been a CISO for a massive company and then had the CISO organization. And then, you're kind of betting, quote unquote, that privacy is the next big thing. So I thought this was kind of a really interesting article. And then Gary, you brought up a really interesting point about, why isn't LinkedIn getting shut down here if they're getting shut down in the UK for LLMs? And then kind of the election, right? The never before in the history of our country had social media platforms had such an influence on kind of what we might be doing at the polls, right?
Yeah, and there's no easy. So I'm admitting there's no easy solution to it,
right?
But just to say that put freedom of speech in front of everything, and now tech companies have such control over how they influence people in either direction, regardless of what your party is, doesn't matter. And it's like completely out of control. And then you see this happening, but we're letting it happen here. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's what freedom smells like. You know what I mean? And so it's this constant balance between freedoms and having to have some rules, and it never works out. Like there's no good solution, but I think we are really far to one side right now, and we're seeing like tangible effects in all areas of our of the world, really.
And Andrew, you mentioned why UK or why Europe and why GDPR is this comprehensive data privacy framework. It's because in the EU and in other countries, they see data privacy as a fundamental human right. In the US,
that's
the closest we can get to in the United States is in our Constitution. There's nothing about data privacy. It's just the right to be let alone. And that's what the US privacy laws, and why it's a patchwork of not just US privacy laws, but each state having kind of their own unique flavor. And then sectoral law, FTC, FCC, HIPAA, GLIBA, all these other things lay on top of it, makes it very confusing. And it's this patchwork of different laws and regulations. And we have not adopted this comprehensive, really laws that have any sort of teeth. We'll win, right? Big. Am I coming?
Yeah. It just
froze
for a second.
Yeah. So I think big tech is winning in the US because you follow the dollar, you follow the monies. Where we are starting to see some movement is in the data broker world, right? You're seeing a lot of regulations around people that scrape and use a ton of data. I think we're going to get into that, some of the nuances of that, and some of the ways MSPs can help. But till we see it as more of a human right. Versus just something we're using to help instill some level of trust, right? I am of the camp where privacy is data privacy, and privacy is a myth, largely.
Absolutely. So let's start, Brian. We'll start, Andrew, with maybe a little background on Brian before I jump in.
Yeah, Brian, quick intro of yourself, and I know a lot of folks out there know you. But intro, and then Brian, why this pivot, into, I'd love your thoughts on privacy, privacy MSP, your company now. We know that the cyber call isn't a sales thing, and I know you know that really well. I'm just more curious of why, with all the things MSPs need to focus on these days, what you're seeing, because I know you personally, you started this thing a few months ago and you're busier than you've ever been already. So you're really good at seeing trends and models. So I think it's important for MSPs to hear the why behind what you're seeing too. So let's start off with the background and then go to there.
Oh, sure. Just a quick snapshot. Yeah, in the 90s, came up through the engineer ranks. In 1999, started my first IT MSP, built, grew, sold, exited several of those. As Andrew said, I was a full-time CISO for about 4 years for a fintech company that did about $50 billion a year of online transactions, built a number of programs from the ground up, operationalized those programs, a lot of compliance readiness work. And then, like Andrew said, pivoted this year largely to focus on data privacy, but more data, just at a higher level, data protection and data privacy. I think data is, we've all heard this cliche before, it's the new oil, it's the gold. But, and now with AI and how data is used, and you hear more about governance, right? So we get into governance, just a fancy way of just rules and practices on how we manage data, right? So you see all of that, where protecting systems, endpoints and that kind of stuff, that's table stakes, right? That's a baseline of things. The why behind all the system protection and the endpoint protection and all that kind of stuff is the assets, primarily the data assets that organizations have accumulated. So that's why the focus on data. And I think taking this next level of perspective on why the data's the gold, the crown jewels is the data. It's not the server or the cloud services or the endpoint a user's using. It's the data is the main asset that we're trying to protect.
And it's like, I don't know, just anecdotally, I can tell you that not just me, but my kids, in the past 6 months, I can't tell you how many notices we had. The ones everybody gets, which is change your password. The passwords were breached, from, whether it's Disney or one of the online, apps. But now, hey, we recommend that you lock your credit. Like, I spent a couple hours last week going in and locking my credit with the 3 credit agencies, and my kids have to do the same thing. Like, there's no one that hasn't, like, I'm trying to figure out if everyone's been breached.
Oh, yeah.
It's
your
every
information's out
high-level
there,
company
right?
that has
No
your
doubt.
social security number has had some type of an incident. It is
Yeah.
not secure. I mean, the fact that you have to give your social security number to get cable is ridiculous.
Right. Or even, when I was at a conference a few months ago, I went in to get a seat at a table at a restaurant, and they wanted my name and my phone. I could see open tables, but first they have to have my name and my phone number and all this information. It's like, wait a second, that you're violating several different principles around data privacy, right? Data minimization and purpose of the use of the data. You don't need my phone number to give me a seat at the table, right? And so that's where adopting better privacy practices and discipline around this, I think you're going to see, especially as our kids get older, I think more scrutiny around, hey, I don't want to give you this information, or if I do give you this information, I want to know why you're collecting it, who you're sharing it with, how you're protecting it, and I think we'll see an increased scrutiny. I think there's generations though that have just been trusting, but I do think that philosophy on why do you need my information, and how do I find out what information you have on me, and how do I have the opportunity to correct that, and hey, if I want you to forget all about me, what's the mechanism to do that? And so that's and I get this question a lot too, Gary. I don't know if you do, but this question of Well, data security, data privacy, they use it interchangeably, and really data security is right. It's the locks on your front door. It's why you lock your front door is data security, but you close your blinds and you close your drapes for data privacy, right? That's the equivalent of data privacy. And you also hear the cliche sometimes is I can't have privacy, and I say this a lot, and people don't know what I mean. I can't have privacy without security. So what I mean by that is it does no good to close my drapes and blinds if my front door is open, right? So that's why security is kind of the baseline foundation, and then data privacy is how am I collecting and using personal information.
You know what's funny? I do think it's changing. I know some young people that have two phone numbers. They keep like a dual SIM, or they have a Google Voice account, and that's basically the number that they use for everything that they put into Uber and Open Table, and every time you're asked, to put your discount in at the grocery store. So they're already starting to figure out how to segregate their lives.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Look, first of all, I love what Eric Sunt said in chat, Gary. He said, like, no threat actors ever ransomed a network switch.
Nope.
And it's a great line.
That's a good lead in, right? To where we're trying to get here. So, Brian, let's start with your take on this UK ruling halting LinkedIn and the ripple effect. So, what's your take on this? Explain to people what's happening and what you think this could mean moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let me interpret the LinkedIn UK thing, and maybe that'll help kind of lay some of the groundwork. So the commissioner, which is the enforcing agent in the UK, off topic, but with Brexit, UK is no longer part of GDPR, but they have their own UK GDPR.
Yeah, don't get me started on Brexit. That's a whole nother call.
So side thing. But the enforcing agency there stepped in and stopped LinkedIn from using British users' data, right, to train their AI models, because LinkedIn was doing this without properly informing or getting consent from users.
Is doing it.
Right. And so here's the stinky part of this, though, and why it pisses people off. It's one thing if you want to start using the data to train your AI systems, right? But there has to be proper notice and proper consent. You can't just introduce a new radio button and automatically opt me in without telling me about this and being able to explain it. Right. So this really shines a spotlight in my mind on how critical it is to have, again, data governance, right? Governance, again, just a fancy word for rules and practices that we use to manage our data. And user consent, especially working with AI, I think it's a reminder for us as MSPs, right, to ensure our clients stay compliant with privacy regulations like the US laws and GDPR. And also, Gary, I think this is a prime example of how data privacy is evolving, like we've been talking about, right, into a very real trust and compliance concern or challenge for businesses, right? So the ruling halting LinkedIn's use of AI models based on British users' content, I think is just the tip of the iceberg. What we're really seeing here is regulators, right, finally getting some teeth, right? Taking a firmer stance to LinkedIn and Meta and Google and all these other people that violate it. These fines have been like rounding errors, or it's just a cost of doing business for them. But it's going to continue to erode trust for all the reasons that we talked about. And for MSPs, I think again what this means is it means we need to be prepared, right, for these ripple effects, right? Even smaller businesses may find themselves facing similar scrutiny as regulators shift their focus to this entire data ecosystem, right? I think of it a way as once the bigger players are held accountable, think of CMMC and all the shit rolls downhill, right? These cascading compliance requirements and contracts that MSP's clients sign with their customers. There's a ton of data privacy and compliance and data security obligations and requirements being forced on them. So I think of it a way that once the bigger players are held accountable, it's only a matter of time before this level of attention trickles down to our clients.
It just,
right?
Everything takes so much longer here. You
Gary,
think about it, like the UK, like their government is like, have you ever watched it on TV? It almost feels like it's in disarray, right? And they can get this far, and we can't. We're not anywhere on it. Even with TikTok, we can't get anything pushed forward. Like, how long have we been tracking CMMC for the whole time we've had this show, right? To get that, we think to get there. I think people get disheartened. So with that, talk a little bit about personal data and how it's being tracked online. And are people aware of how coordinated this is? That there's a profile that's put
how
together.
coordinated and intentional and monetized,
Yeah.
right? And so again, great question, Gary. And I think the short answer is no. I think people probably blissfully unaware of how much data they're giving up, right? Every click, every page view, every piece of content we engage with, it's being tracked in some way. Free apps and website, we've all heard the cliche, if the service is free, then you're the product, right? That means all the data you input, everything you do, it's their business model, right? And they thrive on collecting this data from us as consumers. It's for profiling, and I'll talk a little bit about AI later, but tracking mechanisms, Gary, they work by collecting data about our activities. So think about like cookies, right? We've all seen the cookie consents and those kinds of things. There's scripts embedded in websites and apps that we use. And when we visit a site or use an app, these mechanisms they track what page we view, right? What we click, how long we stay, other things like pixel tracking and device fingerprinting, even collect more detailed info, right? Our device type and our location where we're at. And we give this up freely, right? And this data is used for things like ads and analytics. And for MSPs, I think it's critical.
That's at best what it's used for.
At best, right? And the thing is we don't really know. And that's where the transparency concept keeps getting messed up, right? And I'll talk about AI at some point, but AI violates so much about data privacy, especially when personal information or even confidential information goes in, because AI is a black box. Okay, developers and especially users of AI and large language models, LLMs, and the like, they can only explain how it works to a certain point. The decisions AI makes and the output it makes and some of that, they don't know. And so how can I be transparent with you if I'm using a tool that's a black box that I don't know how?
Have you ever seen another technology like this where the creators of it are the ones saying it's a problem? Like, they're telling the government this is an issue. They're not trying to hide it. They're the ones saying like, hey, this cannot run amok, right?
Well, I think the responsible ones are, right? They're ethical, that do the right things, are recognizing the dangers of it, right? It can be a great tool in the right hands, but great tools in the right hands oftentimes can have an adversarial effect to it too. They can be weaponized, they can be used in a way, and especially if it's technology we don't understand how it works, I think that the red flag should go up and start to say, hey, we need to better understand how this is doing what it's doing. Before we have this wide-scale adoption and data scraping and all this data input into this model. And that's why the EU is so scared of it. It gets into people profiling and human rights violations and putting people in buckets and making decisions, even like credit decisions and things based on some of this data where they don't even understand how the output's happening.
Yeah. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, Gary. One thing I was curious, Brian. Third parties. With MSPs, and Gary, I'd love your input on this, because the MSP, the role of the MSP. You've talked about this. If you're not changing your relationship with your customers, you're left behind. And
yeah, we're at a turning point in the next 24 months, I believe, in the business.
Yeah. And like you said, for years, we were able to not have to worry about that. We could always be laggards, Gary, and get away with it. But let's just take third parties, Brian. And this is, Eric out there always talks about this too. He's big on, looking at, governance and risk. And we have third party vendors, again, Gary, we've never had more as MSPs, right?
And our customers.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going to go with this. So as MSPs, Brian, we've got to worry about not only the 40, 50 vendors that have our data, right, as MSPs, but then also our customers who are, as we've also talked about, have mass SaaS adoption. And we talked about that on the show. So, what things do we as MSPs need to, I guess, worry about for our own shops, but then for our customers? And again, Gary, to you, maybe after Brian answers, like, where does an MSP, what role is this? Because again, you always talk about roles and processes, and this is, one where we have to look at, do we have the scale to do this, or are we just gonna, at the whim of, which we don't want to be at the whim of customer or what our customers, vendors are doing and our vendors. So Brian, let you take a shot at this.
Yeah, as I think about what you're sharing there, Andrew, I think the key is having strong vendor management program in place. I think that's the kind of a place to start. And I'd love to, I don't want to take things sideways here shortly, but I'd love to talk about as an MSP, our clients' customer contracts that they sign and engage in. But I think vendor management's a good place to start, right? MSPs should really focus on helping clients create better contracts and service level agreements. I think that's how we're going to evolve, not as lawyers or attorneys, but consulting and advising on some of the data security and data privacy requirements that clearly define things around data ownership and handling practices, breach notification protocols, right? It's not enough to just trust your vendors. I think you need to verify, right? They're adhering to your and meet at least your risk profile, your privacy and security standards. I think another potential strategy really is segmenting sensitive data, right? If your clients are sharing data with vendors, they should be limiting the amount and type of data, right? That's where you get into data privacy program too, and data privacy program development. Where you can limit or if you think about it like a data minimalist, less exposure, less attack surface, fewer risk. And also as MSPs, I think we should be advocating for periodic audits and assessments of those vendors, right? MSPs can offer these services directly or even partner with specialists to ensure that vendors' controls and safeguards they have are aligned with risk tolerance.
So Gary, Brian mentioned a few things. Like, do MSPs on the margin have good grasp and command of breach notification laws, would you say?
No.
And
in general, I would say no. Obviously, there's some pretty mature security focus first, what I call security first MSPs that would. But in terms of general population, I would say no. And unfortunately, to do the things we're talking about here, on one side of it, we're talking about data privacy. And if you don't understand your customers, you just did the BIA last week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're not asking the right questions, and you know how I can tell when I look across my customer base? So in general, we're seeing non-recurring revenue as a percentage of recurring revenue start to go down. Makes sense, right? You only take a server to the cloud once. You don't do that project again, but it's not even. So we see it more dramatic with some companies and some people have not yet been affected. It's a longer tail for them. And when I dig into it, it really is, I'm calling it the death of Captain Obvious. Like, when your relationship with your customer is just replenishing their stuff, and that's as far as it goes, you're missing all the opportunities and creating all the risks. So the opportunities are, they live in a world of apps. We need to figure out how to help them report, secure, data privacy, automate those things. But if that's not the relationship we have, not only are we giving up revenue streams, but that customer's risk is increasing. until it gets to the point where they realize it. Then they're going to find someone who can help them. Does that make sense, Brian?
It does. And I've been on a crusade, for lack of a better way of putting it, the last, I'd say, several months, because this year has been the year of amendments and addendums to MSAs. And here's what I'm seeing, and why I'm trying to shout from the hilltops on this, guys, is if you do risk assessments, if you're an MSP and you do risk assessments, you are, I don't want to use the word negligent, so I'm not going to use that, but you are missing opportunities and you are missing significant risks in your client's risk profile. If you are not sampling as an MSP, if you're not sampling your client's customer contracts, does everybody follow me? Your clients have customers. That's how they make money. That's how they sell their stuff. Your clients are like you. They get excited about cash flow, right? Cash is king. And your clients, as an MSP, your clients sign contracts with their customers. In those customer contracts that your clients have, there's a treasure trove of data security, data privacy, and compliance requirements in there that your client agreed to. They signed off on this, right? Because you're not in that flow. You know, you hear a lot about MSPs having vCISO services and that kind of thing. That's a optimal place to insert part of your vCISO services. Hey, I want to be in my client's reviews of contracts with their customers because I want to make sure our security program and what we're doing on the IT side and security side and program side aligns to and supports the contracts that my clients are signing. It's not just cyber risk liability insurance. That's another just requirement that's in a contract that our clients sign, right? And there are so many things that our clients agree to that they don't even realize. And I don't want to get into the technical weeds, but even on things like data ownership, as MSPs, we have clients that have amassed a ton of data, right? Terabytes of data over the years that they really don't have a right to. They don't own that data. A lot of them are taking their data now, even small companies, they say, hey, we've got 2 terabytes of customer data and it's data we've amassed. We're going to go ahead and throw an LLM or even generative AI at this and start doing all kinds of BI reports and all kinds of cool stuff and that kind of thing. Your clients don't own the data. They're using the data for a purpose that wasn't agreed to with their client. And most of these addendums, Andrew and Gary, that our clients are signing, it's making it clear that even if you're going to de-identify and aggregate the data, you have to get permission to use that data. And you should only, from data lifecycle management, you should only be retaining that data for the length of the time that you need it to fulfill the service that you're doing in that. So my point here is, as risk assessments and you're kind of doing this for your client, you're missing risk and you're missing significant opportunity to align and communicate this in a way where when you talk to your client, you say, hey, I sampled your contracts and hey, could you help me? I've got this contract and there's a lot of stringent data security, data privacy compliance requirements. How much revenue is tied to this? And they might say 10 million bucks. If I'm selling solutions or building a program and aligning, that gets the client's attention because they can connect the revenue and their potential breach to that agreement. They can connect the dots there. And this is the year of addendums and amendments, with especially because of AI is stirring that. It's who owns the data and data, not just data security, but data privacy and compliance requirements in there.
Gary, what's awesome about that, and love your take, is Brian just probably spoke for 5 minutes. Not one thing he talked about was technology, really. And again, it was all related to the business. He talked about significant numbers. I was going to ask, is 10 million a lot or a little, right, Brian? Well,
it doesn't matter. You can say percentage. A lot of clients say, hey, what percentage of your revenue does this contract represent? And they say 30%.
Right.
That's significant, right?
I was just joking around with you, but we know millions a lot. But this is the point is, and I love the fact that you people listening for the cyber call get to benefit from this, because if you can have that kind of a conversation, Gary, true or false, how many other MSPs are having that conversation with a prospect? Hey, look, wanted to ask you a few questions about, I noticed, you do business with these kinds of companies. They're, from what I understand, data privacy is pretty important to them. Have you guys revisited those contracts and how much revenue is associated? Like, MSPs don't have those conversations on the margin, Gary.
Yeah, look, this is my message. I'm working today. I'm already working on my deck for peer meetings coming up, in October before DattoCon. And a big part of that message is we can't, Brian, you said it, like table stakes, endpoints, users, you better have command and master all that, because there's so much, not just in terms of what risk there is, and we talk about here, but in terms of where the business is headed, why companies will do business and what they expect from their technology partner, and not like other things 5 years from now. So if you're not changing, and they're all come back to this every week, it seems like, Andrew, we're having this conversation that you have to have a deeper business strategic relationship with your customers. That's what this all comes back to every single week. And if you're not doing that, I can tell you that someone else is going to.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's too late. They're going to knock on the door of your customers, and they're going to ask the questions that you're not asking today. It may be for opportunities for those customers, right, with automation and reporting, or it may be with data privacy, where they uncover risk that you didn't, and give them knowledge. But I believe that you can feel it out there right now, because customers have taken control and are educating themselves. They're not waiting for us as MSPs to guide them through this anymore, like they did for the past 2 decades.
Yeah. Look, let's use a layman's terms analogy, Gar. It's like, you've seen a doctor for years, you're comfortable with that doctor, but you've struggled with some back pain or whatever for years and years and years. But all of a sudden, you run into somebody at an event, and this is a world-known orthopedist, and he just starts asking you some questions that you've never been asked before by the person you've been with for 4, 5, 10 years. And that's when the light bulb goes on, and you're like, wow, I've been with the wrong doctor for
maybe my person didn't keep pace. Maybe my MSP ran out of gas.
Yep.
Well, and what's surprising to me too, and I forget sometimes about where we're at as a community, but a few weeks ago, I talked about what to look for, and if you're going to sample your client's contracts, I jump right to, here's what to look for, here's how to push back, here's how to counsel your client, here's how to have, to kind of do that. And then I forget, the questions I get at the end are, well, Brian, how do we have that conversation? How do we ask? And I'm like, oh man,
you're assuming.
I should have, I made that assumption, Gary, that, and I jumped right to it. And to me, I think it's, and what I see is it's not a question of being scared to say, can I see your contracts? Do you mind? It's saying, hey, Mrs. Client, I want to make sure that you don't have to spend $1 more than you have to on security. Okay. I want to make sure that every dollar you spend is solving a business problem that you have. And I want to make sure that what I'm doing aligns directly to the risk that you face, not the boogeyman, right? Not the compliance police, but I need to better understand the type of work you do and the revenue you make. And that starts with, understanding some of the commitments you've made to your clients. Can I learn more about that? Because I want to make sure I can align everything we do to solving that problem, right? To me, that's the different conversation. And that's some of the, maybe it's more art than science, but these seem to me like simple conversations to have if you understand the why and the motivation is alignment. I want to make sure what I'm doing isn't to protect you from some hoodie wearing hacker in a basement and some of that. Yeah, right. We get that part, right? The consequences. I want to make sure that the promises you made to your customers, you can fulfill those. And there are a treasure trove of things that your clients are promising and commitments they're making, their own service level agreements to their clients, and that talks to availability and how they're going to handle confidential information. And when you read these contracts, they've agreed to all kinds of stuff, right? And then you can say, hey, where you agreed to this? And that's probably why I should be in the flow moving forward as you get new addendums and contracts, just so I can make sure you understand the risks and that where they need to make a decision on, do they want to invest in it, or do they want to put this revenue that this contract or agreement that they sign is potentially at risk because they're in breach, because they're not meeting those requirements. And guess one last thing I'll say, in every one of these agreements that our clients are signing with their customers, they include a right to audit. Your client, if something goes south, or they just pick you're the lucky lottery winner, they have a right to audit you, which means they're going to have their risk nerds on the phone, and they're going to want to see, hey, this is what the client signed off on. Do you have all these things? Do you have these policies? Do you have these programs? Do you have these data subject access request mechanisms? Are you GDPR compliant? All those kinds of things. They're going to get called to the carpet on and not be prepared, put that revenue at risk. Didn't mean to go sideways on client contracts, David, but these are the things that when you talk about AI and data privacy and that get our clients' attention and get our clients to get their wallet out and spend money and know that they're investing in things that actually are solving a business problem and shrinking business risk for them.
Brian, you don't have to apologize. Look, I know your days as an MSP in Arizona, in Phoenix, and I know you had a lot of friendly competitors, and they didn't like, from a standpoint of didn't like competing with you. And I'm glad you're saying what you're saying, because I want our audience to hear why you were so good as an MSP because of the conversations you were having. Right.
It decommoditizes us, right? It takes the commoditization of our bundles and everything that we do, and puts us in a different light with our clients, right? Puts us in a different conversation, and I think ultimately we're stickier and provide more value for it.
Yeah.
I mean, Andrew, from the time I've been in this business, I never thought I was in the technology business, but even today, when it's so apparent, the average MSP still thinks they take care of infrastructure, whether it's cloud or that's still what they think. And the faster they break that, and what you just alluded to, the amazing thing is, if you just listen to the last 2 months of cyber calls, you hear this repeating theme, and you will pick up something that you can put into your customer, VCIO conversation almost from every episode. Go out, start having these deeper conversations. You don't figure it out all at once. It's a learning process, but you start them. And then, once you get that pattern recognition and start to be more interesting to your customers, once you get a level of competence, when you get in front of a prospect, it is like taking candy from a baby. It is so easy for someone like Brian to go in, spend 10 minutes with any prospect, lead that conversation in a direction, and get the prospect to say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know 5 times. 5 I don't knows is they want to know if you can help them. That's the result of it. And they don't care whether you charge them $6,000 or $4,800.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a whole different game, and it's open to everyone. And it's not defensive anymore. Like, it's offensive.
Look, I think that a good moniker, Garrett, is if I'm in front of a prospect and I'm starting to talk about, like Brian says, the boogeyman, right? Any type of FUD, right? Hacks, this, that. If I'm talking about technology, right? I'm probably moving further away from the sale than closer to the sale. If I'm asking, questions, right, about the things that Brian just shared.
More and more, because there's more and more MSPs making the turn. They're making the turn. Like, they're reading the tea leaves. So more of your competition is going to be having the right conversations. And once they get good at having those conversations, they can afford to spend more on sales and marketing. So the chances that these companies are going to be knocking on the door of your customer is greater. And we're seeing it happen in the marketplace. But it's available to everyone, right, Brian? Like everyone can do this. It may take you a little time and effort.
Yeah, but how difficult is it to call? And maybe this, especially the contract reviews, it isn't for all of your clients. But if I think about your top, as an MSP, my top 5 or 10 clients historically are a major chunk of my revenue. My best clients, right? I probably want to go in there and maybe have this conversation. It's an existing client. It's not a prospect. It's an existing client, and you just say, hey, I just want to make sure that what we're doing is solving a business problem. I want to make sure you don't have to spend $1 more than you have to. I want to make sure you're aligned, that we're aligned, and we're supporting you with the right tools and technology and support and services that solve a problem. And in doing that, could I look at, even if you want to do a screen share of the last few client contracts that you did, you don't have to send them over to me. I don't need to know the dollars necessarily, but let's skim through it, and I'll show you kind of what I'm looking for in the contract or agreement. Those are conversations that connect at a business level, at a human level, and it shows that you care. Right? You care about their business, and you want to make sure that the promises they made, they can follow through on and protect their revenue.
What key areas you're looking for, Brian, just since you brought it up, that the folks out here can, is it you're looking for keywords like data privacy, data
what's cool in most contracts is they start off with definitions. So that's usually where I start. They'll define what a breach is. They'll define some of these things. So definitions is the first place to start. It's usually at the front of the contract. But most contracts and agreements these days, they have their security and privacy addendums or exhibits, and they're usually separate. So that's what makes it nice if you are going to sample your client contract. Just say, hey, I just need to see the exhibit that talks about data privacy and data security and compliance. But Andrew, that's where I gravitate towards, and there's common things to look for in there. But our clients are agreeing to, they don't own the data, right? They need to be aware of that, right? Our clients don't own the data, their customers do. And there's common areas where you want to look. As an MSP, I'd look at, say, hey, most of them, get this or not, this blows my mind, that our clients will sign agreements that promise that they'll report a security incident within 24 hours to their customer. Well, a security incident, somebody clicks on a phishing email, and I got to call my client and let them know, hey, Jane Doe clicked on a phishing email today. We got it all handled, but I'm just, exercising what I need to do to keep us consistent with our agreement.
And I'll be calling you again in 10 minutes.
Yeah, right. So that's where you push back and you say, I talk to my client and say, this is usually an area where we would probably want to narrow this down and expand the time, right? So we'd say a confirmed data breach involving the data within the scope of this agreement within 72 hours, right? Because, and I posted this on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, and I said, don't agree to 24 hours. And I got some pushback. I'm like, oh, MSPs, any MSP worth their weight in salt would be able to respond within 24 hours. Why would you push back? They don't get it. Right. I don't know who all has been battle tested out there and in bad situations, but when there's an incident or data's been suspected of being breached, it takes a while, and several different areas determine, hey, was the data encrypted? Was it breached? Who do I have to call? Was the breach of data in scope for this particular client or agreement? And narrowing down and getting it to a point where you're ready to communicate. I want 72 hours of a confirmed data breach of the data involved in the scope of this agreement, not 24 hours for any security incident. Do you see the gap there?
But a great point you also bring up, Brian, and again, I'm glad this group's listening in today, where you could go into, for example, talk to me about, what you've done in the area of, have you had a counseling session with a breach attorney? Do you know what might happen in the event? Like, do do you know who
Yeah,
to
we
call?
don't have to figure it all out, right,
Right.
Brian? Like we can lead them in that direction
Right.
and let them figure it out. We don't
But do you
have
see
to,
the
we don't
nature
have
of
to
this?
be their lawyers.
Not, and it doesn't constitute legal advice at all, right? It's counsel, but it's more on the advisory side. But do you see this type of conversation as an MSP that you can have with your client? You're talking about a specific promise they made that's attached to revenue. What could resonate or be more relatable to your client than that?
Yeah.
Right? You're not talking about compliance, blah, 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 or NIST framework, this or that, or CIS controls, blah, blah, blah. All that can come in, right? All that has a place, but not when I'm talking to my client. When I'm talking to
And
my client, it's a promise they made. I want to help you fulfill that, right?
Brian, bridge back to our webinar last Thursday on BIA. What a great segue, maybe, Gary, right? If you're with a prospect, has your MSP ever done a BIA with you? Because that's where we start. Huh? What do you mean? Yeah, well, look, everything that, as far as, your continuity planning to make sure if something bad happened, this, and this, like it's like, a baseline going in with a new, go back to the doctor analogy, right?
Absolutely. You go in there and the answer is no. You don't have to even say like, oh, you have to have that. And you're in. All you got to say is, let me tell you why we do them for our customers.
Right.
And let me tell you what we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't do them.
Right.
Here's what it is. And you just explain it to them and let them infer the rest. But like
Right.
you said, Andrew, you're saying you got to start with step one.
Right. Right. And Gary, I think this is why you've always said you joke around. You're always trying to figure out why you don't want to go to appointment number 2, but why you don't do vulnerability scans as a sales motion.
Don't need to do a network analysis. And I'm not, and if you're doing it and it works for you, I'm in favor of anything that works. I'm just saying, listen to Brian for 10 minutes in front of a customer. I don't need anything else. I have everything I need to know how qualified that prospect is. I've uncovered some pain. I see how they make decisions, and I could take 10 more minutes to decide whether I want to allow them to go to the next step of the sales process with me or not.
Right.
Done.
Right.
That's it.
Right. And that's when you typically test, Gary, right? Hey, look, company your size. I'm telling you right now, we're going to be probably 7,200 a month. You mentioned you're paying 5,500. Does it make sense to even have another conversation?
Absolutely. And you can create from just what, again, you can go to the last 7 or 8 cyber calls and pick up stuff. Just from a couple clips today from Brian, you can ask the kind of questions to get you there when you meet a prospect. And by the way, just by helping them, you're not even selling them.
Right.
You're literally there just learning about their business, and you're just offering and helping and giving them a different perspective. The result is, hey, do you think you could help us? Usually is what they say to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not even, I'm not even calling it sales. They're selling us.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah. So, it's great when the right thing to do is also the right thing for your business. And that's what we've been talking about in recent weeks here.
Yeah. Gary, reminds me, by the way, and I just want to say this because you like you said, since you had your MSP and I've known you for 20 years, but I remember you saying from your ADP days about, feature poker, and that's the thing you used in your early days as an MSP. It's like someone says, well, we use this technology, or it's like the same conversation, right? In a different way.
Our customers are with us for 7 to 10 years. One day we might have a couple features they don't, another day. Can we talk about the process and the people and the roles and how it addresses your risk and your productivity and your security? And they should be making strategic decisions now on how they buy an MSP. You have to teach them how to make strategic decisions. The same way if you're an MSP and you have a vendor, whether it's a software or services vendor, you can't make it on feature poker. You got to start making strategic decisions now. There's bigger things at play. We have to run our business that way, and then we have to teach customers and prospects to run their business that way.
It's interesting. I'm going to give a shameless plug to the keynote speaker at Write a Boom, Gary, because you just said we have to teach. So Brent Adamson who is the keynote speaker, who wrote the Challenger sale, who's coming out with his next book. He calls it customer confidence, Gary and Brian. And since the pandemic, he's done this massive, he's a researcher at heart, but, is in sales. His research has shown that the biggest, in B2B selling, the biggest end result in sales is no decision. And the reason it's been no decision on the margin, obviously there's very good companies that are selling a lot. But he said the reason is we haven't given the prospect the right questions to ask. The confidence isn't in us as the MSP, it's in their ability to make the right decision. So we need to, back to your word, Gary, teach them. What are the right questions to ask internally? What are the right teams to pull in? How do you figure out, should we, invest this much? Should we invest this much? Is data and privacy important? Is it not important? Et cetera, et cetera. He's like, that is the biggest opportunity for sales in the next era. He believes it's around having the right teaching people how to make the right internal decisions. And, Brian just gave I think a class on it.
It's not just the next, it's been that way.
Right.
Like, it's not new. There's just more, there's more levers as an MSP that our customers now understand.
Mm-hmm.
So the first two MSPs I had, we had to work much harder, right? Especially in the first one, to find those levers that we could apply that to. But now they're just everywhere, and they're giving us the levers, like the one we're talking about today. Like, they're aware of it, and some of them know more about it than we do, Brian.
Yeah, very, very true. And Andrew, I think when we talked over the weekend, I've got to run here in a couple of minutes. I got to mentally shift gears for the next client meeting. But at the same time, I know we kind of went sideways a little bit into client contracts and data security, data privacy, and compliance requirements in those contracts. But to Gary's point, clients and soon MSPs, again, shit rolling downhill, there is a tremendous amount of pressure because of all these laws and regulations and just people technologically married to one another through APIs and integrations and all that stuff. Cascading compliance requirements are here and now. And to Gary's point, our clients are already educated. They're already feeling the pressure from their, downstream vendor risk assessments being done on them, right? And this right to audit across the ecosystem, right? And I think, a good connection oftentimes is getting into these agreements, understanding what your clients have agreed to, but there's a ton of data security, data privacy, and compliance requirements that you can help your clients with. And that kind of what got us started today, I think, was on the LinkedIn UK breach. But again, that is what this compliance and regulatory pressure does is it creates this peer pressure, if you will, across all these people that say, hey, if you're going to do business with me, you got to meet this list of requirements. And guess what? That entity has to push that down to their suppliers and vendors and so on and so on and so forth. So MSPs, you're already in the boundary, you're part of the deal too, but this is how you can help align your programs and services, solutions and bundles and all that stuff you do in a way that's relatable and resonates to the client and their business and revenue.
Yeah. And look, we've seen a lot of signals, but this is a really good signal because it's LinkedIn and it's in a major economy, right? That we're seeing this. And so these are the kind of things that people start to ask questions. Other governments start to look at this and watch. And this is the kind of thing that starts a ball rolling. And it gets to LinkedIn, and then it moves it to the others.
And we've talked about GDPR, very comprehensive privacy law. California mimics GDPR. Blue states in America do what California does, right? So we're seeing like a dozen states having more comprehensive data privacy laws, and then soon the red states, and everybody is gonna follow in the U.S. That's kind of the flow around some of these data privacy and data security requirements. But AI is right there. You have the EU AI Act and those kinds of things. All of this creates pressure, right? And where the pressure comes in is having to meet these requirements. And guess what? You know, if your client can't meet these requirements, they're going to miss out potentially on that revenue or sell into sectors they've sold to for years, right? CMMC and DFARS is real. It's coming, right? It's just another cascading compliance requirement. And again, what's more relatable to your clients than being a protector of their revenue, not keeping their blinking lights and white noise going? It's protecting their revenue and their reputation, right? Change the game.
Way to sum it up, Brian. I know you got to shift gears to your 2 o'clock meeting.
Thanks, Brian.
Meeting. Yeah. We'll wrap it up a little early today. Brian, really appreciate you coming on. Everybody out there, have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Monday. Thanks, Garrett, as always.